The frozen wind cut through Owen Lancaster's coat like a blade as his horse stumbled beneath him, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was going to die out here in the New Mexico Territory wilderness. The year was 1876, and the blizzard that had caught him on his journey from Santa Fe to White Pine had transformed the familiar landscape into a white hell where every direction looked the same and death waited in the howling darkness. His fingers had gone numb hours ago, and he could no longer feel his face. The horse beneath him shuddered and fought against the wind, but Owen could sense the animal's strength failing just as his own was. He had been a cowboy for 10 years, since he was 18, and he had survived stampedes, droughts, and violent men with quick draws, but the weather was an enemy no gun could shoot. He barely saw the figure emerge from the white curtain ahead, bundled in furs and moving with purpose through the storm that was killing him. Owen tried to call out, but his voice was lost in the wind. His vision blurred, and he felt himself sliding from the saddle. The ground rushed up to meet him, and the cold that had been biting at him suddenly felt almost warm. He heard sounds, voices maybe, but they seemed far away and unimportant. Strong hands gripped his shoulders, and then there was movement, dragging, pulling. The world went dark, warmth. That was the first thing he became aware of when consciousness returned. Not the painful burning of frostbite, but gentle, persistent warmth seeping into his frozen limbs. Owen opened his eyes slowly and found himself staring at a ceiling made of earth and wooden beams. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, and he could smell smoke and something cooking. He tried to sit up, but his body screamed in protest. "Do not move yet. You need time." The voice was feminine, accented, and carried an authority that made him obey without thinking. Owen turned his head carefully and saw her for the first time in clear light. She was Apache, probably around his own age of 28, with long black hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that held both caution and something softer as she looked at him. She was beautiful in a way that made his breath catch, though that might have also been because his lungs still ached from the cold. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a croak. "My home. I found you in the storm. You would have died." She moved closer, and he could see she held a wooden bowl with steam rising from it. "You must drink this. It will help." Owen managed to prop himself up on one elbow, and she helped him take the bowl. The liquid was bitter but warming, some kind of herbal tea that spread heat through his chest. "My horse, in the shelter with mine, the animal will live." She watched him drink with an expression that was hard to read. "My name is Grace Falling Water. My mother was Apache. My father was a trader from the East. He gave me an English name before he left. Owen Lancaster." He finished the tea and handed back the bowl. "I owe you my life, Miss Falling Water. I was heading to White Pine from Santa Fe, got caught in the storm. Should have known better than to travel this late in the season. White Pine is 3 days' ride from here in good weather. The storm will last another day at least." Grace set the bowl aside and pulled a blanket more securely around his shoulders. "You are lucky I was checking my trap lines when I found you. Another hour and you would have frozen." Owen looked around the dwelling more carefully now. It was a small structure, partially dug into the earth for warmth, with careful construction that spoke of someone who knew how to survive in harsh country. Furs and dried herbs hung from the ceiling. Tools and weapons were arranged neatly along one wall. Everything had a place and a purpose. "You live out here alone?" Something flickered across her face, pain maybe, or anger. "Yes, alone now." He wanted to ask what she meant by that, but the exhaustion was pulling at him again. His eyes felt heavy, and the warmth of the fire and the blankets was lulling him back towards sleep. Grace seemed to sense this and stood. "Rest now. We will talk more when you are stronger." Owen wanted to protest, to thank her properly, to ask 100 questions, but sleep claimed him before he could form the words. When he woke again, dim light was filtering through cracks in the doorway, and the storm still howled outside. Grace was sitting near the fire, working on something with her hands. As his eyes adjusted, he saw she was making repairs to a pair of snowshoes. Her movements were precise and practiced, and there was a gracefulness to the way she worked that held his attention. "How long was I asleep?" he asked. She looked up without surprise, as if she had known the moment he woke. "Through the night and most of the day. It is nearly evening now." "The storm is still strong." Owen sat up more carefully this time, relieved to find his body responding better. The fire's warmth and rest had done their work. "I need to see to my horse." "I already did. Both horses have food and water. They are warm enough." Grace set aside her work. "You should eat. Your body needs food to recover." She prepared a meal of dried meat, some kind of corn cake, and more of the herbal tea. Owen ate gratefully, realizing he could not remember his last proper meal before the storm hit. As he ate, he studied his rescuer more openly. Grace Falling Water moved with quiet efficiency, and there was a strength in her that went beyond the physical. She wore practical clothing, a mix of Apache and settler styles that suited life in the wilderness. But it was her eyes that kept drawing his attention. They held stories he wanted to hear, depths he wanted to explore. "Why do you live out here alone?" he asked, then immediately worried he had overstepped. "Forgive me, that is none of my business." Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Owen thought she would not answer. Then she sat down across the fire from him, her expression distant. "I was married 3 years ago. His name was Running Deer. We lived with his band, moving with the seasons. But the soldiers came. They said we had to go to the reservation. My husband refused. He said we had done nothing wrong, that we were living peacefully." Her voice grew harder. "They shot him. They shot many. I ran. I have been here since then, in this place my grandmother once showed me. It is hidden, hard to find. The soldiers do not know it exists." Owen felt anger rise in his chest at her words. He had seen the way Apache people were treated, the injustices done to them in the name of expansion and civilization. It had always sat poorly with him, though as a cowboy trying to make a living, he had felt powerless to change anything. "I am sorry. That should not have happened. Many things that should not happen do." Grace met his eyes. "You are different from other white men I have known. You listen. You do not interrupt to tell me I am wrong or to make excuses. My mother taught me that listening was the first step to understanding. She died when I was young, but I remember that lesson." Owen set aside his empty bowl. "Do you ever go into the towns, White Pine or anywhere else?" "Sometimes in summer. I trade furs and herbs for things I cannot make myself, salt, metal tools, but I go carefully. I keep my head down. There are men who would hurt me or worse if they knew I was alone with no one to protect me." She poked at the fire, sending sparks upward. "It is not the life I wanted, but it is the life I have." "That is not right," Owen said quietly. "You should not have to live in fear." "Should not, but do." Grace looked at him again, and this time he saw a hint of curiosity in her expression. "Why were you traveling to White Pine?" "Work. I heard they needed hands at the Morgan Ranch outside town. I have been working cattle most of my life, and the last ranch I was at sold off most of their herd. Not enough work to keep everyone on." Owen stretched his legs out, testing their strength. The feeling had returned to his feet, though they still ached. "I have no family left, no ties to any particular place. I go where the work is." "You are a wanderer then, like the tumbleweeds." He smiled at that. "I suppose so. Never thought of it that way, but yes. I have been moving from place to place for years now. Never seemed to find a reason to stay anywhere." Grace tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him aware of every detail of his appearance. He probably looked rough after his ordeal, trail-worn and weather-beaten even before the blizzard, but she did not seem to see him with judgment, only with that careful assessment. "You have kind eyes, sad but kind. That is rare." "I could say the same about you," Owen replied before he could think better of it. Then he felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "I mean, you saved my life. A stranger. You did not have to do that. You could have let the storm take me and no one would have known." "I am not someone who lets people die when I can prevent it." But her expression softened slightly. "Even if they are white cowboys who should know better than to travel in early winter storms." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Fair point." They talked long into the evening, sharing stories of their lives. Owen told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas before drought forced his father to sell everything. About learning to work cattle as a way to survive. About the loneliness of a life spent in bunkhouses and on long trails. Grace spoke of her childhood split between two worlds, never quite fitting into either. Of learning Apache ways from her mother's people while her father taught her to read and write in English before he disappeared back east when she was 12. Of the happiness she had found with running deer, brief though it was, and the grief that still weighted her heart. As Owen listened, he found himself drawn to her in a way that went beyond gratitude for his rescue. There was something about Grace falling water that called to a part of him he had thought long dead, the part that wanted connection, wanted home, wanted something more than the next job and the next trail. The storm finally broke the following morning. Owen woke to silence, the absence of howling wind so complete it was almost startling. Pale sunlight crept through gaps around the door. He sat up to find Grace already awake, packing supplies into a leather bag. "The storm has passed. You should be able to travel soon, though I would wait another day to let the trails settle." She did not look at him as she worked. Owen felt a strange reluctance at the thought of leaving. "I could help you with things around here first, repay you for saving my life." "That is not necessary." "You owe me nothing." "I disagree." He stood, pleased to find his legs steady beneath him. "I owe you everything. Without you, I would be a frozen corpse out there. The least I can do is help with firewood or repairs or whatever else you need." Grace paused in her packing and turned to face him. "Why would you do that? You have work waiting for you in White Pine. You said yourself you need the job." "The job can wait a few days. This is more important." Owen met her eyes steadily. "Please, let me help." Something shifted in her expression, a wall coming down slightly. "There are trees that fell in the storm. If you are strong enough, we could cut them for firewood. I will need much wood to last the winter." They worked together over the next 3 days, and Owen found a peace in the labor that he had not felt in years. Cutting wood, hauling water from the nearby stream that ran even in winter, making small repairs to Grace's shelter. She was a tireless worker, efficient and skilled. But more than that, she was good company. They talked as they worked, sharing more stories, more pieces of their lives. Owen learned that she knew healing herbs and could track game over stone, that she could read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals, that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. And Grace learned that Owen was stronger than he looked, with a work ethic that matched her own, that he knew how to fix things and solve problems, that he was gentle with the horses and respectful of the land, that his sadness came from years of loneliness and loss, but that beneath it was a goodness that had not been ground away by hard living. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire after a day of hard work, Owen found himself speaking words he had not planned. "I do not want to leave tomorrow." Grace looked at him, and in the firelight her eyes seemed to hold entire worlds. "You must. You have a job waiting, a life to live. What kind of life? Moving from place to place, working for other men's dreams, sleeping in bunkhouses with nothing to show for it. Owen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I have been living like that for 10 years, Grace, and in 3 days here with you I have felt more alive than in all that time combined. She was quiet for a long moment. Owen, you do not know what you are saying. You are grateful because I saved your life. That is natural, but it is not a reason to give up your plans. Is it so hard to believe that I might want to stay for other reasons? He held her gaze. That I might be starting to care about you. Grace stood abruptly and moved to the door of the shelter, looking out at the night. You should not care about me. I am Apache. You are white. The world does not allow for people like us to care about each other. The world can go to hell, Owen said bluntly, standing as well. I have seen what the world does. I have seen the cruelty and the injustice. If the world says I should not care about a woman who saved my life, who is strong and smart and beautiful, then the world is wrong. She turned to face him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes, though they did not fall. You do not understand. If people knew you were here with me, they would say terrible things. They might do terrible things to both of us. Then we will be careful. Owen moved closer but did not touch her, giving her space. Grace, I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am not asking you to trust me completely when you have known me for only days. I am just asking if I can stay a while longer, if we can see where this might lead. Why? The word came out almost as a whisper. Why would you want this? Because for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel like I might have found something worth staying for. Owen let all the honesty he felt show in his voice. Because when I think about riding away tomorrow and never seeing you again, something in my chest hurts. Because you are remarkable, Grace Fallingwater, and I want the chance to know you better. She searched his face for a long time, and he let her look, hiding nothing. Finally, she spoke. The job in White Pine, you need the money. I have some savings, enough to last a while if I am careful. He paused, and there is game here, wood to cut. I could earn my keep. It would not be easy. The winter is long, the solitude is heavy. I have lived through hard winters and heavier solitudes. Owen took a careful step closer. What I have not had is a reason to endure them. Maybe now I do. Grace closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, he saw a decision had been made. Stay then, for now, but Owen, I cannot promise you anything. My heart is a damaged thing. I do not know if it can be opened again. I am not asking for promises, just a chance. She nodded slowly. A chance then. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite its newness. Owen rose early to tend the horses and bring in wood for the fire. Grace prepared meals and worked on her crafts, making items she would trade in town come summer. They hunted together, and Owen marveled at her skill with a bow. She moved through the forest like a spirit, silent and sure. In the evenings, they talked or sat in comfortable silence, and slowly, carefully, the space between them began to feel less like a gulf and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Winter deepened around them, but inside the earthen shelter, warmth and something fragile but growing took root. Owen had never been a man of many words, but he found himself sharing things with Grace he had never told anyone. His fears that he was wasting his life. His guilt over not being able to save his father from despair after they lost the farm. His loneliness that had become so much a part of him, he barely noticed it anymore until it started to ease. Grace, in turn, slowly opened her own guarded heart. She spoke of her mother, who had died of fever when Grace was 16. Of the kindness Running Deer had shown her, how he had seen her as whole when others saw her as split between worlds. Of her grief and rage at his death. Of her fear that she would spend the rest of her life alone, afraid to trust. afraid to hope. "You are not alone now," Owen said one evening as snow fell softly outside and the fire burned low. They were sitting closer than they had before, near enough that he could have reached out and touched her hand. "For now," Grace replied, but there was less conviction in the qualification than there had been. "For as long as you will let me stay." She looked at him then with an expression so vulnerable it made his heart ache. "What if I let you stay and then you leave anyway? What if you wake up one day and realize this life is too hard, too isolated? What if you regret giving up your freedom?" Owen did reach for her hand then, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She did not. Her fingers were warm and strong as they curled around his. "Grace, I have been free my whole adult life. Free to go where I wanted, do what I wanted, work when and where I chose. And I was miserable. That kind of freedom is just another word for having nothing to lose. I do not want that anymore." "What do you want?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "This, you, a reason to build something instead of just drifting." He squeezed her hand gently. "I want to wake up every morning and know I am where I am supposed to be, with who I am supposed to be with." Grace was silent for a long moment, and he could almost see the war happening behind her eyes, fear battling with hope. Then, slowly, she leaned toward him. Owen met her halfway, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and tentative and perfect. The kiss was brief, but when they pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. "I am afraid," she admitted, her forehead resting against his. "So am I," Owen said honestly, "but maybe we can be afraid together." She laughed softly at that, and the sound was like music. "That is a terrible romantic sentiment. I never claimed to be good with words." He smiled and kissed her again, longer this time, deeper. When they finally parted, both were breathing harder. "But I mean it. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Grace repeated, testing the word. Then she nodded. "Yes, together." The winter continued its cold grip on the land, but inside the shelter, spring had begun. Owen and Grace grew closer each day, learning each other's rhythms and ways. He learned that she sang softly when she cooked, old Apache songs her mother had taught her. She learned that he carved small figures from wood when his hands needed something to do, a nervous habit from childhood. They learned to read each other's silences and moods. They learned how to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and movements. And slowly, carefully, they learned how to love again. It was not a wild, reckless love, though there was passion in it. Rather, it was a love built on cold mornings and shared work, on conversations by firelight and the comfort of presence. It was a love that grew from respect and understanding, from seeing the worst in each other and choosing to stay anyway. 2 months after the blizzard that had nearly killed him, Owen woke before dawn with Grace sleeping beside him, her head on his chest, and knew with absolute certainty what he wanted to do. He lay still, not wanting to wake her, and thought about how to proceed. By the time the sun rose and Grace stirred, he had made his decision. "Marry me," he said as she opened her eyes. She blinked at him, still half asleep. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at her. "I want you to be my wife. I want to be your husband. I want to make this official and permanent." Grace sat up, suddenly very awake. "Owen, we have talked about this. The world outside this place will not accept us. A white man and an Apache woman married, we would face hatred everywhere we went." "Then we do not go everywhere. We stay here or we find somewhere we can live in peace." Owen sat up as well, taking her hands in his. "Grace, I love you. I have loved you for weeks now, and every day I love you more. I do not care what the world thinks. I only care what you think." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and she did not wipe them away. "I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid that speaking it would make it real and therefore something that could be taken away. But I do love you, Owen Lancaster. Then marry me. Let me give you my name. Let me give you my heart such as it is. Let me be yours for whatever time we have. Your name, she said slowly, and he saw her understanding the weight of what he offered. In this world, his name would offer her a measure of protection she did not have on her own. As Mrs. Owen Lancaster, she would be seen differently than Grace Falling Water living alone in the wilderness. It was not fair, it was not right, but it was reality. My name and everything that comes with it, Owen confirmed. Such as it is, I am not a wealthy man, I do not have land or prospects. But what I have is yours if you will take it. Grace looked at him for a long time, and he could see the moment she decided to take the leap, to trust, to hope. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Owen pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and commitment into it. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. We should go to White Pine, Owen said. Make it legal and proper. I want there to be no question. Grace hesitated. Owen, going to town will be dangerous for me. You know this. You will go as my intended bride. Anyone who has a problem with that will have to go through me. His voice was firm. I will not let anyone hurt you, Grace. I swear it. She touched his face gently. You cannot fight the whole world. I will fight whoever I need to fight, but I do not think it will come to that. Yes, there are people who will disapprove, but there are also good people, people who will see what I see, that you are a good woman who deserves respect and kindness. He covered her hand with his. And if I am wrong, if White Pine will not accept us, then we will go somewhere else. Or we will come back here and live alone, but I want to try, I want to do this right. After much discussion, Grace agreed. They would wait until the worst of the winter had passed, then make the journey to White Pine. In the meantime, they spent the remaining cold months preparing. Owen worked on building an addition to the shelter, expanding it to be more comfortable for two people planning a permanent life together. Grace taught him more about the plants and animals of the region, about how to read signs of weather and game. They hunted and gathered and stored food, preparing for a future they were building together. And in the quiet moments, in the dark of night or the pale light of dawn, they loved each other with an intensity that surprised them both. Owen had never felt passion like this, never known what it was to give himself completely to another person. Grace, who had thought her heart too damaged to open again, found herself healing in his arms, finding joy she had believed lost forever. When the first signs of spring began to show themselves in the longer days and the slightly warmer air, they prepared for the journey. Owen had kept his horse in good condition through the winter, and Grace had her own sturdy mare. They packed supplies and set out early one morning when the sky was clear and the trails were passable. The ride to White Pine took 4 days, longer than it would have in summer but manageable. They camped at night, and Grace showed Owen how to cover their tracks and choose defensible positions. He realized again how capable she was, how she had survived alone in the wilderness through skills he was only beginning to understand. As they drew closer to White Pine, Owen could sense Grace's tension increasing. She spoke less, and her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. He wanted to comfort her, but new words would ring hollow. Only action would prove his promises. White Pine was a small town, barely more than a collection of wooden buildings along a single main street. But it had a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and most importantly, a church with a minister. Owen and Grace rode in during the middle of the day when most people were about their business. Heads turned as they passed. Eyes followed them with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Owen kept his head high and his hand near Grace's, a silent statement of togetherness. They stopped at the general store first, needing supplies before anything else. The proprietor, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a substantial belly, looked up as they entered, and his expression immediately soured. "We do not serve Indians here," he said flatly. Owen felt anger flash through him, but he kept his voice level. "Then it is fortunate she is with me. We need supplies: flour, salt, coffee, and whatever vegetables you have that are still good." The proprietor looked between them, clearly trying to work out their relationship. "She yours?" "She is my intended wife," Owen said clearly, loudly enough that anyone in the store could hear. "And I would appreciate it if you would address her with the respect that deserves." The man's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth as if to argue. Then he seemed to think better of it, perhaps seeing something in Owen's expression that warned against pushing further. "Fine. But you will pay in advance. I do not extend credit to strangers." "That is fair." Owen paid for their supplies, and the man gathered them with poor grace. As they were leaving, a woman's voice stopped them. "Excuse me." They turned to find a woman in her 40s, well-dressed and with kind eyes, standing near the door. "I could not help but overhear. You are to be married." "Yes, madam," Owen replied, instinctively wary. "I am Margaret Foster. My husband is the minister here." She smiled at Grace, who looked stunned. "I wanted to welcome you both to White Pine. It is not often we have new people coming to town, especially those seeking to start a family here." "Thank you," Grace managed, her voice uncertain. Margaret's expression grew more serious. "I will not pretend everyone will be welcoming. This town has its share of narrow minds, but my husband and I believe in the sanctity of marriage and the importance of love. If you need someone to stand with you at your wedding, I would be honored." Owen felt something tight in his chest ease slightly. "That is very kind of you, Mrs. Foster. It is simple decency, Mr. Lancaster, Owen Lancaster, and this is Grace Fallingwater." "Soon to be Grace Lancaster," Margaret said warmly. "Come, let me take you to meet my husband. He will want to talk with you both before the ceremony, but I can tell you now that he will marry you. He believes that love between two people who choose each other is a blessing, regardless of what anyone else thinks." They followed Margaret through the town to the small church at the far end of the street. Reverend Foster proved to be as kind as his wife, a tall, thin man with gentle manner and intelligent eyes. He spoke with Owen and Grace separately and then together, asking about their faith and their commitment to each other. Satisfied with their answers, he agreed to marry them 2 days hence, on the coming Sunday. "It will give people time to hear about it," he explained. "Better to do this openly than to sneak around. You want to start your marriage with honesty and integrity." They found a room at the small boarding house on the edge of town. The landlady, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, was not warm, but she was practical. Money was money, and they paid in advance. Owen and Grace took separate rooms to maintain propriety before the wedding, though they took their meals together and spent their days preparing. Word spread quickly through White Pine that a white cowboy was marrying an Apache woman. The reactions were mixed. Some people were openly hostile, muttering insults or spitting when Owen and Grace passed. Others were curious but wary, keeping their distance but watching. And a few, like the Fosters, were genuinely kind, offering congratulations and welcome. The evening before the wedding, Owen was sitting on the porch of the boarding house when a man approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Owen tensed, prepared for trouble. "Owen Lancaster?" the man asked. "That is right. I am Sheriff Tom Harrison." "Mind if I sit?" Owen gestured to the empty chair beside him, and the sheriff settled his weight into it with a sigh. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains in the distance. "I heard you are marrying that Apache woman," the sheriff finally said. "I am." "That is going to cause problems. There are people in this town who do not take kindly to that kind of thing." Owen turned to look at him directly. "Are you one of them, Sheriff?" Harrison met his gaze steadily. "What I am is a man who has seen too much blood spilled over stupidity and hatred. I am a man who is tired of burying people because they could not see past the color of someone's skin." He paused. "I am also a man who believes in the law, and the law says you have the right to marry whoever you choose, provided you are both willing adults." "We are both willing," Owen said firmly. "I figured as much. So here is what I am telling you. You go ahead and have your wedding tomorrow. I will be there in uniform to make sure there is no trouble. After that, I would advise you to be careful. Keep your head down. Do not go looking for fights, but do not back down from who you are either. People will test you. How you handle it will determine whether you can live here in peace or not." Owen considered this. "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your honesty and your protection. Just doing my job." Harrison stood. "For what it is worth, I saw her in town earlier. She carries herself well. Respectful but not beaten down. I respect that. And I respect a man who stands by his choices." He nodded and walked away, leaving Owen with much to think about. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the early spring sun warming the land. Owen dressed in his best clothes, which were not much but were clean and neat. He had gotten a haircut and a shave from the town barber, who had been professional if not friendly. As he walked to the church, his stomach was tight with nerves, but his heart was certain. The church was small but well kept, with simple wooden pews and a cross at the altar. When Owen entered, he found the Fosters there, along with the sheriff and a handful of townspeople he did not recognize. Some looked curious, others skeptical. But they were there, bearing witness, and that mattered. Then Grace entered, and every thought fled from Owen's mind except how beautiful she was. She wore a dress that Margaret Foster had helped her make, simple blue fabric that complemented her coloring perfectly. Her long black hair was loose down her back, and she carried a small bunch of wildflowers. But it was her face that captured him, the way she looked at him with love and trust and hope shining clear. Owen moved to meet her, taking her hand. Together they walked to where Reverend Foster waited. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the small church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Owen Lancaster and Grace Fallingwater in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with reverence and commitment. These two people have chosen to bind their lives together before God and this community. If anyone knows of any reason why they should not be joined, speak now or forever hold your peace." A tense silence followed. Owen held his breath, half expecting someone to object, but no voice was raised. The moment passed. "Owen Lancaster, you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." "I do," Owen said clearly, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "Grace Fallingwater, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Grace replied, her voice strong despite the tears shining in her eyes. "The rings." Owen produced 2 simple gold bands he had purchased from the general store, despite the proprietor's reluctance to sell them. They were plain but solid, symbols of the commitment they were making. He slipped one onto Grace's finger, and she did the same for him. "By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and by God above, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Owen, you may kiss your bride." Owen cupped Grace's face gently and kissed her as applause broke out, scattered but genuine. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. They were married. Grace Falling Water was now Grace Lancaster, and Owen had never felt more complete in his life. The Fosters hosted a small reception at their home, inviting Owen and Grace and a few others who had attended the ceremony. It was modest but warm, with food and drink and genuine celebration. Margaret Foster hugged Grace and welcomed her as a sister in Christ. The sheriff shook Owen's hand and wished them well. Even a few of the other townspeople who had been merely curious before seemed to warm slightly, drawn in by the obvious love between the newlyweds. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, Owen and Grace slipped away to the boarding house. They would spend one more night in White Pine, then head back to the shelter in the morning. But tonight was theirs, their first night as husband and wife. In the small room Owen had rented, they came together with a passion tempered by tenderness. This was different from the nights they had shared in the wilderness, made sacred by the vows they had spoken. Owen loved his wife slowly and thoroughly, learning her body as if for the first time, amazed that she was his and he was hers. Afterward they lay tangled together, Grace's head on Owen's chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I am your wife," she said softly, as if testing the words. "You are my wife," Owen confirmed, kissing the top of her head. "My love, my partner, my home." "Your home?" "Yes. I finally understand what that means. Home is not a place, it is you. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." Grace lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes he saw his own feelings reflected back. "I feel the same. For so long I have been alone even when I was surrounded by people. But with you I am found." They made love again as the moon rose, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss. And when they finally slept, it was deeply and peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they belonged to each other. The next morning they prepared to leave White Pine. As they loaded their horses, Margaret Foster appeared with a basket of food for their journey. "You take care of each other," she said, hugging them both. "And know you have friends here if you need them." "Thank you for everything," Grace said, and meant it. "You have been kinder than I expected." "Love should be celebrated, not condemned," Margaret replied. "Come back and visit when you can. I would like to get to know you better, Grace Lancaster." The name still sounded strange, but Grace smiled at hearing it. "I would like that too." They rode out of White Pine as husband and wife, facing an uncertain future but facing it together. The journey back to the shelter took the same 4 days, but it felt different now, lighter somehow. They talked about their plans, about improving the shelter and adding a garden in the spring, about possibly getting chickens for eggs and a cow for milk, about building a life. "What about the job?" Grace asked on the 3rd day. "The Morgan Ranch, do you still want to pursue that?" Owen had been thinking about this. "I think I should." "Not to leave you," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "But we will need money. The shelter is good, but it is rough living. If I could earn wages for a few months, we could buy supplies to make things easier. Maybe even start building a proper cabin." Grace nodded slowly. "That makes sense." "But Owen, I would not feel safe in town. The shelter is hidden. If you work, I will stay there." "I do not like the thought of leaving you alone," Owen admitted. "But I understand your concern. Perhaps I could work spring and summer, come home in the evenings." The ranch is not so far that it would be impossible. They worked out a plan over the remaining journey. Owen would seek work at the Morgan Ranch after they settled back into the shelter. He would work long days but come home each night to Grace. It would be hard, but they were used to hard work. And it would give them the means to build something better. The shelter welcomed them back like an old friend. Unchanged, but somehow different now that it was the home of husband and wife rather than rescuer and rescued. They fell back into their routines, but with new ease and intimacy. Grace cooked while Owen chopped wood, and they sang together as they worked. They made love by firelight and planned their future by daylight. When the weather fully turned to spring, Owen rode to the Morgan Ranch to inquire about work. The ranch was a substantial operation, with hundreds of cattle and a large homestead. He met with John Morgan, the owner, a gruff but fair man in his 50s. "You have experience with cattle?" Morgan asked, looking Owen over. 10 years, sir. I can rope, brand, break horses if needed. I am a hard worker and I do not cause trouble. You are that fellow who married the Indian woman, Morgan said, and Owen tensed. Heard about that? Yes, sir. Grace is my wife. I will not apologize for that. Morgan studied him for a long moment. Did I ask you to apologize? I asked if you have experience with cattle. Do not be so ready to fight, Lancaster. Not everyone is your enemy. Owen relaxed slightly. You are right. My apologies. I can use a good hand. Pay is $30 a month plus meals while you are working. We are about to start spring roundup, so it will be long days. You up for that? Yes, sir. Though I need to be clear that I will be going home each night. My wife is alone and I do not like to leave her unprotected for long. Morgan nodded. Fair enough. As long as you are here at sunrise and put in a full day's work, I do not care where you spend your nights. Start tomorrow. Owen rode home with good news and Grace celebrated with him. That night, they made love with particular intensity, knowing that their time together would be more limited for the next months. But they were building something, and that made the sacrifice worthwhile. The work was indeed hard. Owen rose before dawn each day and rode to the Morgan Ranch, where he spent long hours in the saddle, rounding up cattle, checking fences, and doing the endless tasks that came with ranching. But John Morgan proved to be a fair boss, and the other hands, while initially suspicious of Owen's marriage, gradually accepted him as he proved his competence and kept his word about not causing trouble. He returned home each evening exhausted but satisfied, and Grace was always there, waiting with a meal and a smile. She told him about her days spent tending the garden they had planted, hunting small game, and working on expanding their shelter. They were building a life together, piece by piece. Summer came, hot and dry. The work at the ranch intensified as they moved cattle to higher pastures and fought to keep them watered. Owen was gone longer hours now, sometimes not returning until full dark, but he always returned and Grace was always waiting. One evening in late July, Owen arrived home to find Grace looking particularly pleased with herself. I have news, she said as he dismounted. Good news, I hope? Very good. Come inside. Owen followed her into the shelter, which had grown substantially over the months. They had added a second room and a proper chimney. It was beginning to feel like a real home. Grace took his hands and placed them on her stomach. I am with child, she said simply. Owen felt the world tilt. You are certain? Yes. I have not bled in 3 months and I feel different. The same way I felt when. She paused and Owen realized she had been pregnant before with running deer. That child had never been born, lost to the same violence that took her first husband. Oh, Grace. Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. This is wonderful. We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby, she repeated, and he heard the wonder and fear in her voice. They talked long into the night about what this meant, about preparing for a child in the wilderness, about whether they should consider moving closer to town, about 1,000 practical concerns, and beneath it all, an excitement that was almost overwhelming. I want this child to grow up free, Grace said as they lay in bed. Free from hatred and fear, free to be both Apache and white, to take the best from both worlds. We will do everything we can to give our child that, Owen promised. And they will have parents who love each other and love them. That is more than many children have. As the summer progressed, Grace's pregnancy became more obvious. Owen found himself feeling protective to the point of being overbearing, and Grace had to gently remind him that she was not fragile. She had survived alone in the wilderness. She could handle being pregnant. "But I want to take care of you," Owen protested. "You do take care of me, every day. But I am still myself. I still need to move to work to feel useful." She softened her words with a kiss. "Let me carry our child my way and trust that I know what I need." Owen learned to step back, though it went against every instinct. He watched in amazement as Grace continued to hunt, to tend the garden, to do the work of living, even as her belly grew. She was strong and capable, and their child would have the best mother imaginable. In late August, Owen came home to find Margaret Foster at the shelter, sitting with Grace and having tea. He was shocked to see her so far from town. "Mrs. Foster," he said, confused but pleased, "this is unexpected." "I hope you do not mind the intrusion," Margaret replied, standing. "Grace sent word that she was expecting, and I wanted to offer my services. I have helped birth many babies in White Pine. I thought perhaps I could do the same for your child when the time comes." Owen looked at Grace, who nodded. "I asked her to come. I have knowledge of herbs and healing, but I have never birthed a child. I would feel better having someone experienced here when the time comes." "Of course," Owen said, moved by Margaret's kindness. "We would be grateful for your help." Margaret stayed for dinner, and Owen learned that she had been visiting Grace regularly over the summer, riding out from town every few weeks. The two women had become genuine friends, and Margaret's acceptance of Grace had influenced other townspeople. While there was still prejudice, it was less overt now. The Lancasters were becoming part of the community, if a slightly separate part. "You have built a good home here," Margaret said, looking around the expanded shelter. "It is cozy and comfortable. Your child will be lucky." After she left, Owen held Grace close. "I did not know she had been visiting. I did not want you to worry, but Owen, I need friends too. I need connection. Margaret has been kind and I value her friendship." "I am glad," Owen said honestly. "I was worried about you being alone so much. Knowing you have had company eases my mind." As autumn approached, they made final preparations for the baby's arrival. Owen built a cradle from wood, carving it carefully and smoothing every edge. Grace sewed blankets and tiny clothes. They talked about names, debating back and forth. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him for your father," Grace said one evening. Owen's father had been named Orville, a name Owen had never particularly liked. "That is kind of you, but I think we should choose a name we both love. What about Gabriel?" Grace considered this. "Gabriel. Angel messenger, I like that. And if it is a girl, I have always liked the name Georgia. What do you think, Georgia Lancaster?" "Yes, I like that too." The first snow fell in mid-October, and Owen knew his time at the ranch was coming to an end. He spoke to John Morgan about leaving for the winter, and the rancher agreed readily. "You have done good work, Lancaster. I would be happy to have you back come spring if you are interested." "I am interested, and I am grateful for the opportunity. Your wife is expecting, I hear." "Yes, sir." "Any day now." Morgan reached into his desk and pulled out a small leather pouch. "A bonus for the baby. You have earned it." Owen opened the pouch to find it heavy with coins, more money than he had expected. "Mr. Morgan, this is too much. Consider it an investment in the future. I need good hands and I need them to stick around. A man with a family is more likely to stay put." Morgan offered his hand and Owen shook it firmly. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Owen rode home that last day with his heart full. He had money saved, a job waiting in the spring, and a wife he loved more every day. Soon they would have a child. Despite all the challenges, despite the prejudice they still faced, they were building a good life. Grace went into labor on a cold night in early November. Owen had ridden to White Pine to fetch Margaret Foster, and the older woman arrived just as the contractions began in earnest. Owen found himself banished from the main room, sent to tend the fire and boil water and generally stay out of the way. It was the longest night of his life. He paced in the cold, listening to Grace's cries of pain and wishing desperately that he could do something, anything, to help her. But this was something she had to do, and all he could do was wait and pray. Dawn was breaking when he finally heard it, the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. Owen rushed inside to find Margaret cleaning a tiny, squalling infant while Grace lay exhausted but smiling on the bed. "You have a son," Margaret announced, placing the baby in Grace's arms. "A healthy, loud son." Owen moved to the bedside, looking down at the tiny person who was his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes, when they opened briefly, were dark. He was perfect. "Hello, Gabriel," Grace said softly, tears running down her face. "Hello, my son." Owen knelt beside the bed, one hand on Grace's shoulder, one finger held by the baby's tiny fist. "He is beautiful." "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Grace replied, then looked up at Margaret. "Thank you for everything." "It was my honor," Margaret said, beginning to clean up. "You did wonderfully, Grace. You are strong." Little Gabriel Lancaster came into the world during a time of change and challenge, but he came into a home filled with love. Over the days that followed, Owen watched in awe as Grace nursed their son and sang to him. He found himself making silly faces to earn baby smiles, and spending hours just watching Gabriel sleep. Margaret stayed for 3 days to make sure both mother and baby were healthy, then returned to White Pine with promises to visit soon. Owen sent with her letters of thanks and a portion of his bonus to donate to the church. Winter settled in around them, but the shelter was warm and well stocked. Owen had time to bond with his son, to help Grace with the endless tasks of caring for an infant. Gabriel was a good baby, healthy and alert, and watching him grow was a joy beyond anything Owen had imagined. "He has your nose," Grace said one evening as they sat by the fire, Gabriel asleep between them. "He has your eyes," Owen replied, "and I think he will have your strength." "He will need it. The world will not be easy for him, being mixed blood." Owen had thought about this often. "We will teach him to be proud of both his heritages, to take strength from both sides of his family, and we will love him so fiercely that he can weather anything." "Yes," Grace agreed. "We will do that." The winter passed more quickly than Owen expected, measured in Gabriel's milestones. His first smile, the first time he rolled over, the way he began to coo and babble, making sounds that almost seemed like language. Owen found being a father was the role he had been born for, the purpose he had been searching for all those years on the trail. Spring came again, and with it, Owen's return to work at the Morgan Ranch. It was harder this time, leaving Grace and Gabriel each morning. But the money was necessary, and Grace assured him she was capable of caring for their son alone during the day. "I am not fragile, remember," she said with a smile. "And Gabriel and I will be fine. We will explore the world together." So Owen returned to ranching while Grace and Gabriel had their own adventures. She taught their son about the world through touch and sound and smell, taking him out in a cradle board she had made, showing him the forest and the stream and the sky. By the time summer arrived, Gabriel was sitting up on his own and beginning to show an interest in solid food. On a warm June evening, Owen arrived home to find Grace in the garden with Gabriel, who was sitting in the dirt happily mashing mud between his fingers while his mother worked. The sight made Owen's heart swell with love. This was his family. This was his home. "Hello, my loves," he called, and Gabriel's head whipped around at the sound of his father's voice. The baby grinned, showing two tiny teeth, and held up his muddy hands. "Papa." It was not his first word. That had been "Mama" 2 weeks ago, but it was the first time he had said it clearly, unmistakably. Owen scooped up his muddy son and held him close, not caring about the dirt. "Yes, Papa is home. Did you have a good day?" Gabriel babbled something that might have been yes, and Grace laughed. "We had a wonderful day, and I have news." Owen looked at her over their son's head. "What kind of news?" "The good kind." Grace stood and came to them, putting her arms around both Owen and Gabriel. "I am expecting again. Another baby come winter." Owen felt the same disbelief and joy he had felt the first time. "Another baby. Grace, that is wonderful." "Our family is growing," she said, happiness clear in her voice. "Gabriel will have a brother or sister." That evening, after Gabriel was asleep, Owen and Grace lay together and talked about the future. 2 children. It would be crowded in the shelter. "I have been thinking," Owen said. "We should build a proper house. Use the money I have been saving, something bigger, more comfortable. Before the next baby comes." "A house would be good," Grace agreed. "But Owen, where? Here in the wilderness or closer to town?" It was a question they had danced around for months. "What do you want?" he asked. Grace was quiet for a long time. "I want our children to have both worlds. I want them to know the Apache ways, the connection to the land. But I also want them to have education, opportunities, a chance at a life that is bigger than just survival. If we stay hidden out here, they will have freedom but no future. If we move to town, they will have more chances but more hatred. So we find a middle ground," Owen said. "We build our house somewhere between here and White Pine, close enough that our children can go to school, that we can be part of the community, but far enough that we have privacy and land. Somewhere we can raise horses or cattle, have a real homestead. You have thought about this." "I have thought about little else," he admitted. "I want to give you and our children everything. A real home, not just a shelter, stability, security." Grace kissed him softly. "We already have everything that matters. But yes, let us build something more. For our children." Over the summer, Owen spoke with John Morgan about land. The rancher owned vast tracts, and he was willing to sell a parcel to Owen at a fair price. It was about halfway between the shelter and White Pine, with a stream running through it and good grazing land. Perfect for a small homestead. Using the money Owen had saved and a small loan from Morgan, they purchased 20 acres. Owen spent every spare moment that summer clearing land and beginning to build a house. It was hard work, but John Morgan sent some of his ranch hands to help, and slowly, a structure began to take shape. It would be simple but solid, with 2 bedrooms and a main room, a real wooden floor and windows with actual glass. Grace helped as much as she could while caring for Gabriel and managing her pregnancy. Margaret Foster came out regularly, bringing supplies and helping with the work. Other women from White Pine began to visit as well, curious about Grace and the house they were building. Slowly, grudgingly, Grace was being accepted into the community. By late October, the house was finished enough to move into. It still needed work, but the roof was solid and the walls kept out the wind. Owen and Grace packed up the shelter, taking everything they had accumulated over the past 2 years, and moved to their new home. Gabriel, now over a year old and walking, toddled around the new space with delight, exploring every corner. Grace stood in the main room and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. "We have a house," she said, wonder in her voice. "A real house." "We have a home," Owen corrected, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her expanding waist. "The 4 of us." Their daughter, Georgia, was born in December on a night when the snow fell softly outside their new home. Margaret Foster was there again to help, and this time the birth was easier, quicker. Georgia came into the world with a lusty cry and a full head of black hair like her mother. Gabriel, curious about the crying, was allowed in to meet his sister. He looked at the tiny baby with solemn eyes, then gently patted her head. "Baby," he said clearly. "My baby." "Yes, your baby sister," Grace confirmed, tired but happy. "You are going to be the best big brother." And he was. As Georgia grew, Gabriel watched over her with fierce protectiveness. He brought her toys and tried to share his food with her long before she could eat it. He sang to her when she cried, nonsense songs in a mix of English and the Apache words Grace was teaching him. The years began to pass, measured in the growth of their children and the deepening of Owen and Grace's love. Owen continued to work for John Morgan, and eventually he and Grace were able to expand their herd, buying their own cattle with Owen's wages. They became known in White Pine as hardworking, honest people. And while there were still those who looked down on their mixed marriage, more people chose to see the family's decency rather than their differences. Gabriel started school when he was 6, walking to White Pine each day with other children from nearby homesteads. He came home full of stories about his lessons, about letters and numbers and maps. He was bright and eager to learn, and Grace and Owen encouraged him endlessly. Georgia proved to be more reserved than her brother, but no less intelligent. She preferred to stay close to home, helping Grace in the garden and learning about plants and healing. She had her mother's gift for reading the natural world, and by the time she was 5, she could identify dozens of plants by their leaves alone. In the spring of 1883, Grace gave birth to their 3rd child, a son they named Garrett. He was a surprise, coming 7 years after Georgia, but a welcome one. Gabriel and Georgia adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him or help care for him. Owen watched his family grow with a contentment he had never imagined possible. He was 35 now, his face weathered by sun and work, but his eyes held a peace that had not been there in his younger years. Grace, at 34, was still as beautiful as the day he had first seen her emerge from the blizzard. Maybe more so, because now he knew every line of her face, every expression, every mood. They had built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. One evening, when Garrett was still an infant and the older children were asleep, Owen and Grace sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked. "Marrying me? The struggles we have faced?" Grace looked at him with surprise. "How could you ask that? Owen, you saved me as much as I saved you in that blizzard. You gave me back hope. You gave me love and children and a life I thought I would never have again. We have had to fight for everything. The prejudice, the stares, the whispers. And we have won," Grace said firmly. "Look at what we have built. 3 beautiful children who are strong and smart and kind. A home, land, friends. Yes, some people still see us as different, as wrong, but more see us as we are, a family. That is victory." Owen pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Grace Lancaster, more every day. And I love you, always." As the years continued to pass, the Lancaster family became an integral part of the White Pine community. Owen's skill with horses became well known, and he began to supplement his income by breaking and training horses for other ranchers. Grace's knowledge of healing herbs made her valuable to the community, and women began to come to her with their ailments, seeking her remedies. Gabriel grew into a tall, strong young man who had his father's build and his mother's coloring. He was serious and thoughtful, passionate about learning and justice. He talked about becoming a lawyer someday, about using education to fight for people who had no voice. Owen and Grace encouraged his dreams, putting away money for his schooling. Georgia, quieter but no less determined, showed an aptitude for healing that went beyond her mother's herb lore. When the town doctor, old Dr. Matthews, took her on as an apprentice when she was 16, no one was surprised. She had a gentle way with patients and a sharp mind for diagnosis. Garrett, the surprise baby who had completed their family, was the most carefree of the three. He loved the outdoors and animals, spending his days helping his father with the horses or exploring the surrounding land. He was charming and quick to laugh, bringing light wherever he went. In 1892, when Owen was 44 and Grace 43, Gabriel left for university in California. It was hard to see him go, but they were proud beyond measure. Their son, the son of a cowboy and an Apache woman, was going to become a lawyer. It was a dream that would have seemed impossible when Owen first stumbled through that blizzard 16 years ago. Georgia continued her medical studies, working alongside Dr. Matthews and occasionally traveling to larger towns to learn new techniques. She had no interest in marriage, declaring that medicine was her calling. Owen worried about her being alone, but Grace assured him that Georgia was exactly where she needed to be. Garrett, at 13, was beginning to show an interest in ranching that went beyond helping his father. He talked about breeding horses, about developing bloodlines that would be sought after across the territory. John Morgan, now in his 70s, had begun to mentor the boy, seeing in him a natural rancher. Owen and Grace watched their children grow and pursue their dreams with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that their time of active parenting was ending. But they still had each other, and their love had only deepened over the years. One evening in late autumn, Owen came in from working with the horses to find Grace sitting by the fire, a letter in her hand and tears on her face. Fear gripped his heart. "What is it? What is wrong?" Grace looked up, and he saw the tears were happy ones. "It is from Gabriel. Owen, he passed the bar examination. He is a lawyer now." Owen felt his own eyes prick with tears. "Our son is a lawyer. Our son is a lawyer," Grace repeated, laughing and crying at the same time. "And he has accepted a position with a firm that works on behalf of Indian rights. He will be fighting for justice, just like he always said he would." Owen pulled Grace into his arms, and they held each other, overwhelmed with gratitude for how far they had come. From that moment in the blizzard when Grace had saved his life to this moment, when their son was embarking on a career built on the values they had instilled in him, it had been a long and sometimes difficult journey, but it had been worth every struggle. As 1895 arrived, bringing with it the turn toward a new century, the Lancaster family was thriving. Gabriel returned to New Mexico to open his own practice, focusing on defending Apache people and other Native Americans against unjust laws and treatment. He married a schoolteacher named Sarah, and they began their own family. Georgia completed her medical training and opened a small clinic in White Pine, serving patients of all backgrounds with skill and compassion. She remained unmarried but was deeply fulfilled by her work. Garrett, at 16, was already managing part of the horse breeding operation, working closely with John Morgan and Owen. He had a natural gift for horses and a head for business that promised future success. Owen and Grace, now in their late 40s, began to slow down slightly, letting their children take on more of the work while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They still worked every day, but they also took time to simply be together, to walk their land hand in hand, to sit on their porch and watch the sunset as they had done for years. One evening, nearly 20 years after that fateful blizzard, Grace turned to Owen with a smile. "Do you remember the day you asked me to marry you? You said you wanted to give me your name and your heart." "I remember," Owen replied, Best decision I ever made. You gave me much more than that. You gave me a life, a family, a future. You gave me everything." Owen took her hand, the same hand he had held through blizzards and births, through struggles and triumphs. "We gave each other everything. That is what love is, Grace. Not grand gestures, but the daily choice to build a life together." As the new century approached, the Lancasters looked toward the future with hope. They had 3 successful children and grandchildren on the way. They had land and a home and respect in their community. They had fought against prejudice and hatred and had won, not through violence but through persistence and love and the simple act of living their lives with dignity. Most importantly, they had each other. Owen and Grace Lancaster, cowboy and Apache woman, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. They had saved each other in more ways than just the physical rescue from a blizzard. They had saved each other from loneliness and despair, had given each other purpose and family and love. The year turned to 1900, and with it came a new era. Owen was 52 now, his hair gone gray and his hands gnarled from years of work. Grace was 51, her hair shot through with silver but her eyes as bright and alert as ever. They had been married for 24 years, together for 25, and their love had only grown stronger. Gabriel's law practice flourished, and he became known across the territory for his passionate defense of Indian rights. He and Sarah had 3 children, and they visited the Lancaster homestead regularly, filling the house with laughter and noise. Gabriel often told his children the story of how their grandfather had married their grandmother despite what the world thought, how their love had been strong enough to overcome prejudice. Georgia's medical practice was equally successful. She had become the most trusted doctor in White Pine, known for her skill and her willingness to treat anyone regardless of their ability to pay. She had saved countless lives and delivered dozens of babies. While she never married, she was far from alone, surrounded by grateful patients and their families who loved her. Garrett married young at 19 to a rancher's daughter named Emma. Together they built the horse breeding program into something remarkable, producing horses that were sought after throughout New Mexico and beyond. They built their own home on a corner of the Lancaster land, staying close to family while creating their own life. As Owen and Grace entered their 50s and then their 60s, they became the patriarchs and matriarchs of a growing family. Grandchildren came regularly, filling the house with energy and joy. Owen taught them to ride and to work with horses. Grace taught them about plants and healing, about Apache traditions and stories. The children grew up knowing they were loved, knowing their mixed heritage was something to celebrate rather than hide. In 1910, John Morgan passed away at the age of 86. He left a portion of his ranch to Owen in recognition of their decades of friendship and work together. The gesture moved Owen deeply, and he used the land to expand the horse operation, making Garrett a full partner in the business. The years continued their steady march. Gabriel's children grew and pursued their own dreams. Georgia began training a successor, a young woman who shared her passion for medicine. Garrett and Emma's children, 4 in all, were showing the same gift for horses that their father had. And through it all, Owen and Grace remained the center of it all, the foundation upon which their family was built. They had lived through the Wild West era, had seen New Mexico transform from territory to state in 1912. They had survived prejudice and hardship and loss. But they had also known deep love and joy and triumph. In the spring of 1915, Owen and Grace celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Gabriel organized a large party at the homestead, with family and friends coming from across New Mexico. It was a beautiful day, warm and clear, with flowers blooming and birds singing. As Owen and Grace stood together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Owen thought back to that moment in the blizzard when he had been certain he would die. He thought about Grace emerging from the white storm like a spirit, saving his life with her strength and courage. He thought about every day since then, every moment they had built together. "Thank you," he said quietly to Grace, though the party swirled around them. "For what?" "For saving my life, for loving me, for building this with me." He gestured at the family surrounding them, at the house and land, at everything they had created. Grace smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart 4 decades ago. "Thank you for giving me your name and your heart. For keeping your promise, for being exactly who you said you would be. I love you, Grace Lancaster, and I love you, Owen Lancaster, always and forever." They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their family, and Owen felt the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt on their wedding day. They had lived a remarkable life together. They had taken the worst the world could throw at them and had created something beautiful in spite of it. As the sun set that evening and the party wound down, Owen and Grace sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Their children and grandchildren had returned to their own homes, promising to visit soon. The house was quiet again, just the two of them. No regrets. Owen asked, repeating the question he had asked so many years ago. "Not a single one," Grace replied, taking his hand. "You, only that I did not have more years to give you, that I did not find you sooner. We found each other exactly when we were meant to. Everything that came before led us to that blizzard, to that moment when I found you and you chose to stay." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have lived a good life, Owen Lancaster, a very good life. The best life," Owen agreed. They sat there as darkness fell. Two people who had beaten the odds, who had loved when the world said they should not, who had built a legacy that would last long after they were gone. They had proven that love was stronger than prejudice, that family was more than blood, that home was wherever you chose to build it. Owen Lancaster had been saved from a blizzard by an Apache woman named Grace Falling Water. In return, he had given her his name and his heart. But what they had built together was so much more than a transaction or a repayment. It was a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of two people choosing each other against all odds. And as they sat there in the gathering dark, hands clasped and hearts intertwined, they knew that their story would continue long after they were gone, living on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren they had raised with love and wisdom and hope. Their story was complete, but their legacy was just beginning. And that, they both knew, was the greatest gift they could have given each other: the end.